Thank you. Look, thanks for having me. I was planning on just having a bit of a chat and then opening it up for questions, because disability can be a bit of a strange thing to grasp, and I'm sure you've all got experience of it, but it really rides the line between sickness and just living life. And I'll talk a bit more about that, but I just want you to know I'm super open to any questions you have. I'm going to go a bit conceptual at the start and hopefully have a few personal examples, but if you've got some really practical questions that you want answered as well, I'm happy to chat about that too, because I know on the ground, you know, it might be the questions might be around as much about, you know, layout of lectures as it is about, you know, social inclusion. So let me just tumble through a few things. If you've got any questions at all along the way, feel free to pull me up as well, because, you know, you don't know what other people don't know. So I'm happy to stop and, you know, explain things. So thanks for the intro, Ian. Look, I did just want to tell you a little bit more about my background, just to give you a sense of how it all works. I had a car accident when I was 2 years old, so I've just grown up in a chair through school. So it's been really normal for me to do that. I think I mentioned on my bio about some of the Paralympic stuff, not necessarily to show off, although, you know, why wouldn't you try and show off a little bit? But it's also about showing that there is fantastic things people with disability can do, and to counter the narrative that people kind of think people with disabilities don't do that much or can't do that much, or there's so many barriers that they, you know, that's their life. So my growing up was at a mainstream school, and, you know, friends and all of that kind of stuff, and went to uni, but then also played lots of wheelchair basketball and travelled the world, and it was an amazing experience. But then when I started working at the Royal Talbot Rehabilitation Centre, I was working with people who acquire spinal injuries. And it was an amazing experience, because when your personal experience of disability is one of success and you know, and travel and interaction in the world, and then you're working with people who see disability as tragedy and horrible and loss, which it is when you first have an injury. There was a real disconnection between our philosophies, I guess. So from then, my journey has been to help people understand that just because you have an injury or just because you have a disability doesn't mean your potential is what society often says it is. Working with people who have acquired their injuries, it was a process of working through loss and adjustment, but also reconnecting people with the things that they found important. One of the frustrations working there was disability. I'll start again. One of the frustrations working there was rehabilitation as a centre where OTs and physios and doctors and nurses all work centering around helping that person reduce their injury impact. But what that also does is highlight the injury to be the most important part of their life. So if you've got no experience of disability, apart from what's, you know, heard in half truth through the media, then you have an injury, doctors, nurses, everyone tells you this is the most important thing in the world, then of course you're going to feel so much more loss. So part of our roles there was to reconnect people to what they used to love doing through leisure, through work, through family. And once you give the context of people's lives, there's so much more opportunity for people to find themselves in their disability. So that was really important, and I think it's a really important grounding. So when I started MDI last year, it was really nice because Melbourne Disability Institute has that same conceptual philosophy that just because you have a disability doesn't mean that it's a negative thing. There's all kinds of barriers around as well that help design that concept of disability. And I'll go into that right now. Does that make sense so far? I do have a habit of rambling on, so feel free just to press the hurry up button. I think there's one here somewhere.
No, it makes sense. That makes perfect sense, Campbell. It's really, really interesting. Thank you.
No worries. So I think how we understand disability, how we construct it, that guides how we think about it. There's a lot of, and to go back to my example of the rehabilitation centre, it was amazing to see people go there and have a spinal injury, but they didn't just start off in a neutral way with a neutral sense of what it meant to have an injury. They had a whole backlog of information about what it means to have a disability. And this is through media, this is through, you know, friends of friends, this is through stories. I mean, it's amazing. So how people envisioned disability before they had one actually has a real impact on how they dealt with their own injury. So we all carry this stuff around, and I do as well, with disabilities, impairments that I don't know as much about. So it's a process, not you do it or you don't. But it's really worth thinking about, because we carry a sense of internal bias. And I know this is done through other cultural studies as well, but it's worth knowing for disability we do this. When I first started at Melbourne Disability Institute, we were I was helping out some researchers research a community program, and the researcher was doing a qualitative study on people with autism's experiences of something. And the way she was framing her questions for people with autism was so low. It was almost like, you know, how, you know, are you having fun here? You know, is this getting you out of the house? You know, these questions didn't give any room for celebration of the richness of what was going on there, which was, you know, are you thinking of, is this going to help you get a job? You know, how close to you are you to getting another relationship? You know, are you now finding you're more confident to help your little brother? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's so much more colour than if you just ask these low-end questions. So we're going through a bit of a process now of preparing some disability information packs about how to question your own internal bias, and how to not be afraid to ask these questions. And to give you a few little personal anecdotes, it's not uncommon, and you can't see my wheelchair now, and I feel a bit odd, you know, not showing people my disability, because that's normally part of your thing. But it's not uncommon for me, and I'm, you know, I'll toot my own horn. I'm a Paralympian. I've got a couple of degrees. I don't have a PhD. You know, I feel like I'm probably in an uneasy territory around here. But so if I go out for dinner with friends or meet new people, it's tangible how often people will avoid the question of, what do you do for work? And I'm not sure what it's like, because I'm not an able-bodied person. I don't know what it's like to be, you know, quotes normal, but what do you do for work is a really common way to, you know, meet new people and talk to people. If that's happening to me, as a, you know, confident white male who you know, can do what he wants, really, imagine how that is for people who have speech difficulties, or who have spasticity, or who have, you know, hearing impairments. I mean, you know, the list goes on. So these are really nice examples. Another interesting study, which I can't remember, sorry, but it was done many years ago, and it's timely while I'm talking to you on video, was there was a study done on perceptions of people with disability in interviews, so jobs, vocational interviewing. And the same interviewee was filmed in two ways. One way was on a camera like this, with a close angle, and the other way was on a wide angle of the camera, so you could see the person's wheelchair. Two different groups were asked to rate the person with the interviewee's ability, or, you know, abilities to do the job. And funnily enough, the one with the wheelchair in it was rated consistently lower, even though it was the same person. So, you know, all these great little insights into the world. I'm going to tell you a couple more, just because I enjoy them, and while I take them for granted, I feel like they really paint a more colourful picture than a lot of data. There was another another example is you know, really simple things. And sorry, I'm jumping around a bit, but I'm a father of two kids. my role as the father of I would never say I'm the leader of the house because I'm not at all. But I would like to think that I've got some leadership skills here. When we go to the shops, I go with my wife and my kids. Quite often I'll buy something and I will give the change to my wife. So it's this bizarre thing where you're seen as one of the kids almost, and I can be quite immature and act like a child, but they don't know that. So it's fascinating how you do get treated really differently. And from the point of view of being a father and wanting my kids to respect me and understand the role of a father in the world, it's really quite challenging and can be quite insulting. I have worked out techniques over the years of dealing with that. Some of those are, if they think I'm incompetent, I'll accidentally run over a display or something and knock that over. So there's ways of dealing with it. That's not really a joke either. So look, there's probably heaps of these little stories, and actually I won't go through too many of them, but they do really paint a picture, which is fascinating. Actually, I will give you one more. We used to sit, when I was in the Australian basketball team, we'd do a lot of flying, as you can imagine. So you might have, four members of the team from Victoria going to overseas somewhere. So we'd be waiting for the plane, all four of us in our Australian horrible, bright colours, but we were proud of what we were doing, and we were athletic and we trained, God knows how much. Quite often we'd be there waiting, and we'd get well-meaning people saying things like, you guys are great. You must be almost as good as me, or you must be able to almost beat me. And for people who train every day, hours a day, being told by someone who, often, to be honest, didn't look all that fit, just because they could walk, you must be able to, we must almost be able to beat them. It really was an insight into thinking and perceptions. And this is not to make anyone uncomfortable, because as I said, we all do this to a degree, and it's a process of just awareness. So to go down that rabbit hole a little bit more, there's a couple of great papers which have always, there's one great paper which has stuck with me for many years. It's called The Disability Paradox, Our High Quality of Life Against All Odds. And I can send it through at some stage, but it interviewed, again, it's looking at quality of life and how people see people with disabilities. And the fascinating thing about this was that they rated people with disabilities, perception of their own quality of life, and got a rate, fairly high. There's obviously barriers and issues. But then they rated non-disabled's perception of their quality of life, and it was really low. So, it doesn't match up. And, these are all illustrations of how we kind of misunderstand disability. So, disability construction. I'm not sure, again, like when you do this every day for your life, you don't know what people know. So apologies if you know about this, but there's a really amazing concept called the social model of disability. And I don't know if anyone's heard about this. But the social, so there's two main models that have popped up in the last 20 years. One is the medical model, and one is the social model. So the medical model says that your impairment, we'll call it impairment, your impairment resides in you, and it's there to be fixed. So if someone has a spinal cord injury, they'll go to hospital. Doctors will work on that. They'll try and fix the injury. They'll try and give people wheelchairs or crutches or whatever it is they need to help them kind of function in the world. But the injury and the impairment and the disability is seen to be just in them. Many years ago, it started in the UK with the disability rights movement. They came up with the idea of the social model. And the beauty of this model is that it says that yes, you have an impairment, which is, what works differently or not as well. But the reason you can't get to that nightclub or that job or whatever it is not because of your wheelchair, it's because there's a flight of stairs there. So if you can start to understand that the social model is about the external factors It's about the environment, but also social factors. You know, we see you in a wheelchair, we think you're not as good for that job. So the social model says that my disability actually resides, you know, out here. And it's just so empowering, because all of a sudden you go from being this victim of, you know, layers of things that don't work to actually knowing that this stuff is created by the external environment, and it's created by attitudes. And it means then that you can work on it better. I mean, rather than me saying, you know, I need to walk again, I can say, oh, look, you know, adjust my house to make things accessible. That way I don't have a disability here, or adjust my workplace. That way I can be the same contributing person as I always was. So it's really valuable, and something that's probably not talked about in rehabilitation enough, I would suggest, because it really positions disability where it is, you know, often in the environment. Just to take that one step further, the Melbourne Disability Institute has got a strategic plan, and there's some conceptual frameworks that we use to discuss disability. And I'll send you that as well. But one of them is called critical realism. And it's actually a more nuanced approach at suggesting that disability is a result of the interaction between the individual and the environment. So if it's all about the environment, that means I've got no control. But if it's about the interaction between me and the environment, that means that I can, you know, use my personal skills or, you know, intelligence or whatever to interact, and I can learn. And I won't go too into it, but it's a really nice idea. Is there any questions so far?
I have some general questions, Campbell, but I might wait until the end if you want. If you're on a roll.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. No worries. And I'll just check the time. All right. Look. So let me move on a bit. I guess the social model and the medical model. The other thing that underlines the medical model is I guess it's called the tragedy model, but I'm getting overloaded with models here. It's about how we see disability. Again, I'll go back to the rehab idea. Nurses are amazing, and often, and look, I'm generalising here for the sake of an example, so please, if you're a nurse or no nurses, don't pull me up. But when nurses work with people with acquired spinal injuries, there's a real sense of sympathy and empathy, and you know, it's just the connection they have with people is amazing. Unfortunately, a lot of that is based on this idea that what's happened is so tragic and we just need to be really caring. If you're seen as a tragic person because you've got a chronic disability for your whole life, that is a really challenging thing. Another personal example would be when I was going to uni, or throughout my whole life, I used to get my wheelchair in and out of the car by myself. And before I was a bit more confident, people would, really well-meaning people would say, oh, do you want a hand with that? And you could see them from the other side of the road, kind of walk up and, you know, want to help, which was great. But of course, when you put your chair in and out of your car 3,000 times, you're pretty good at it. And when you're trying to get someone else, when you're trying to talk someone else through how to do that, it becomes a bit of an awkward mess. And it took me a while to actually go from saying, yes, you can help, just to make them feel better about themselves, to saying, oh, look, no, thank you, but it's fine. So there's a really odd dynamic there. But what's important is, if we see disability as a sadness, as a tragedy, as a thing to be overcome, then we never have high expectations. And this is a really important part of what I've always tried to tell people, is that if we look at our internal bias, if we look at our understanding of how disability is created, let's try and then think about, you know, are we asking questions that expects a lot of people? I mean, if I'm only asking questions that are saying, you know, it's great to get out of bed, so, you know, how much TV have you watched today? Well, you know, where is that? That's not respecting someone's capacity. Whereas if I'm asking people, you know, how was work this week, that's expecting they do the same thing as everyone else. And it's really quite an important thing, because how we treat people is often not just what we ask them, it's what we don't ask them. Now, there was a couple of questions there that I'll just get to while I'm here. How do I think the social models are applied across society? Look, I'd be really interested to, actually I might get to these in a minute because I'm going to get a bit disjointed, but I will answer this one, and I'd be interested to hear what you guys think, because I live in a bubble. I live in a bubble with, you know, people with disability I play sport with the Melbourne Disability Institute. So, you know, actually after this, I'd be fascinated to open that up and see, what do you think? Have you heard of the social model of disability, and yeah, can you see it? But before I do that,
I should have mentioned, Campbell, that what we typically do is, if people post questions in the chat, then I can read them out, and that means that you don't have to get distracted by the chat window. And then it also means the video recording will capture the question in full, and then yeah, we can have a proper Q&A at the time of your choosing.
Thank you. I'm trying to do everything at once. I'll just stick to one thing at a time. It's like my manager keeps saying, don't have 89 windows open of jobs to do on your computer. But, so the tragedy model sets us up to thinking about disability as something to get better from, or something that we find as sad, and it's really important to challenge that thinking. Now, another little element of disability, which is a really nice way to think about it, is traditionally disability has been seen as over here. So, you know, how do we define what disability is and who's got a disability, and how do we, you know, help them get rid of barriers, whatever it is. When there's another way of thinking about it, which is, I think, more accurate, which some people have an issue with, but that's another issue. It's called universal design, and universal design includes 7 principles of good design, which take into account everyone's experience. And the beauty of universal design is it says that, you know, disability can help define the edges, and that's good for everyone. So, for example, mobility impairments. Wheelchair users can help designers. If you think about wheelchair users, that can help design wide entrances, you know, ramps, you know, really lots of manoeuvring space. And then the truth is that's not just good for me, and it feels bad to be just good for me, because I don't want to be the example that everyone has to use. It's actually good for people who, you know, parents who use prams, people who struggle to walk, people who it's called temporary disabilities, people who, you know, have a broken leg. Then there's situational disabilities or impairments, where people might have lots of boxes that they're, you know, carrying for work or whatever it is. So there's a whole raft of people that universal design, good universal design, will cater for. And the little catch cry is standard design caters for the middle of human experience, and that doesn't really fit many people at all, where if you use disabilities and plan for the edges, then the middle will follow. So I think it's a really nice idea. One example of that might be, and I'm probably running out of time, but one example might be beach matting. People with disabilities have, for quite a few years, have been trying to get beach matting down, and I don't know if you've seen them, but down to the water in some of the beaches around Australia. And it's great now it's there. But I was there a while ago, sitting in my wheelchair with my kids to the side on the beach matting, and hordes of, and it's not having go at anyone, hordes of able-bodied people were, you know, loving the beach matting because their feet weren't getting hot, and, you know, it's easier to trudge through than the sand. And screaming kids, you know, with boogie boards, it was so much easier for them to go through that. And when they were trying to get past me, they were getting really annoyed. And I was sitting there thinking, this is great, because this is, you know, example of good design helping everyone. And yeah, we'd love to study that kind of stuff because it helps everyone. So yes, so universal design. Look, the other thing I just wanted to touch on was STEM. So I guess it's thinking about gender roles in science and what an example I've got is that disability is a bit like a culture. Well, it is. I mean, some people would say it is. So just to put that out there, where we've recently been working with a professor, Graham Schaefer, who's done, I'll back up a bit. He came to us saying, my idea is I want to get more gender parity in engineering subjects because we're just so overloaded with males and you know, blah, blah, blah. So his idea was to do a subject that includes or is for people with disability. So he's designed, with our help, a human-centered mechanical design subject where students would learn about human-centered design, but we would get a person with a disability as an expert to lead small groups. So they would come and the students would do a human-centered design process with them, and the idea was to have an outcome that you know, would have an item that those people with disabilities suggested might help them or others. And it's been great. He expected 7 or 8 people, and I think he had to cap it at about 40. So, and there was 40% female population compared to 10%, which is expected. So people with disabilities, they really enjoyed it, and some really novel solutions have been developed. They weren't getting prototyped, it was just about the design process, but you know, fantastic idea. And the philosophy was that it wasn't about trying to help the poor disabled people get something that works. It was about, you know, how do we create a meaningful subject for people, and how do we create opportunities to develop, you know, ideas that have been presented by people with disability. So it was a great subject, and we hope to run it again next year. So I think I'll probably stop there. That's the main thing I wanted to say.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Campbell. That's really, really interesting to hear from your experience and to get some insights into these issues. So hopefully everyone's had some information they've received that they can act on and they can consider. In the Q&A or in the chat window, we've got a few questions. So if I put them to you, is that okay?
Yeah, great.
Great. So first question is from Kate Lowry, who says, how well do you think the social model is applied across society? And do you see tangible real world benefits, or is it more of a perspective from others that has changed?
So yeah, look, I'd love to hear Kate's experience of if she's heard of it, or anyone's experience of it if they know about it, whether you want to say it or write it in.
Yeah, if anyone would like to contribute to that, like whether they, I mean, I hadn't heard of that before, Campbell, but it makes intuitive sense that it's a much more inclusive and kind of feels like a socially healthier way to view the issue. But it sounds like perhaps while people have come to that realization or have suggested that as a better mechanism, it maybe isn't disseminated widely enough, or we don't have enough prominence of that conception to create a critical mass of a different perspective. Yep, absolutely. Yep. Sorry, I was going to let Kate say something.
I was just sort of thinking whether or not it's there's been, you've noticed like the real world application of the social model, and that has made living with a disability much more inclusive for all groups, or anyone living with disability, and especially people that may be temporarily disabled with a broken leg or anything like those sorts of things. Or is it just more of a perceptual, theoretical change that you've noticed? Yep,
that's a great question. I guess it's been really slow to be taken up by medical professions, because they are dominated by, you know, you need to do this. You know, they don't have scope to necessarily look at the layers of the social issues, but it has been taken up really strongly by a lot of people with congenital disabilities, and lots of, you know, lots of the disability world actually has been pushing this stuff. While you might not see it talked about, and I'm not surprised, not many people have heard about it. It's actually used strongly in policy and how you design solutions. I guess, I mean, look, I don't want to, I could make up that it's been behind everything, every great solution in the world for people with disabilities, and that wouldn't be true. But I think there's more of it than we realise. So there's a lot of disability rights have looked at the social model, and that's been the way they think about themselves and the world, and that's helped them think about things like, well, how do we advocate for service change or environmental change? And that's where things like curb cuts came from. Without the idea of the social model being behind that, they would just be still thinking about wheelchairs. But because they're saying this is an environmental issue, they can start thinking curb cuts, they can start thinking, why can't we get on buses? Trams, trains, this stuff, all this environmental stuff, it goes hand in hand with the social model. What's caused what, I don't know, but it's definitely there. So it is really important that we try and push that more. And I think it's just such a useful way to think about it. It's also in the World Health Organization, their definition of disability understands there's environmental elements to it. So it's really important stuff, actually. Yeah.
Thanks, Kate. Question from Paul. This was something that was on my mind as well. You've mentioned this already, Campbell, but it seems that there's a lot of parallels or even tie-ins between our view or our conception of disability and general inclusivity. So do you have any suggestions? And this might be specific to your experience, but are there any key actions we can take towards improving inclusivity and reducing that unintentional internal bias that we might have about disability and other issues that are related to it?
Yep. Yeah, that's a really good question. We're trying to actually work with other centres at Melbourne Uni to work on a more combined approach. Look, it's I guess part of this is just understanding difference, and the more you understand difference, the more you untangle what might have been seen as a belief which is negative. From our point of view, discussions around things like understanding construction of disability and understanding, and getting a better sense of what people with disability can do really helps to just reframe away from this tragedy idea. I'll send you, actually, before I forget, I will send you after this. A friend of mine's done an article on looking at media analysis of spinal cord injured population and seeing how they're referred to in the media, and so much of it's tragedy thinking, and it's just a really nice way to unpack it. So I guess, and I'm rambling a bit here, but it's just about education. It's about looking, having a sense that we need to just second guess ourselves, but it's also making sure that we're giving people the dignity to ask them challenging questions, and we're treating them with the same level of expectation that we treat ourselves or our own in group. And that's probably a bit vague, sorry, but I think they're pretty.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. A question from Alison Campbell, and this is very similar to something that had occurred to me as well. So Alison said, with regards to your anecdote about getting your chair out of the car, what would be the right thing for a passerby to do? Is there a different question they can ask, or leave it in the person's hands if they look capable? And I was going to say, how do we strike the balance between being sort of practical in acknowledging that we can provide mechanisms, or that there are support that we can provide, not from a position of pity or sympathy, but simply from a position of practicality, versus viewing the person as an individual, that isn't defined by their disability. And I think that's what your anecdote gets to the heart of. But what perhaps is the way to react to that or respond to that paradox?
Yeah. And look, there's no right answers here, and some people get quite passionate about it, but I don't think there is a right answer. I think it's okay to ask people if you want a hand, and if I was more confident back then, I would have just said, no, I don't. But I guess it's not about being too scared to ask. It's just about trying to put yourself in their shoes. You know, it's okay to ask me if I want a hand, and you know, that's fine. But also, you know, if I've been asked 5 times a day for, you know, 10 years, do I want a hand? It gets annoying. So I guess it's just having an awareness of, you know, what that person might be going through. So I would suggest, don't just rush over and again, this is the expectation stuff. Don't just rush over and expect they're struggling. Give people a minute to see, you know, how they're going, and you know, if they need a hand, then if you think they need a hand, then go over. And I guess that's the same with you know, with anything, with, you know, students in classes or people, you know. And another great example is people with speech impediments. You know, just give people a bit of time to work out what they want to do. Don't try and rush in with your own sense of, you know, I need to help them. A lot of that is just learning to live with your own discomfort a bit, and that's, everyone's got a different level of that based on their own experiences. So I think it's just about thinking about it and, yeah, putting yourself in their shoes.
Thank you. And 2 questions from Laszlo. The first one is, I think, really interesting, particularly from my perspective. He says, are there some strategies for incorporating universal design into our efforts to communicate our science to the public?
Your science in particular, or I've got to say I don't know a lot about your...
Yeah, I guess that would probably be science in general, but then, yeah, our science in particular, for example, is a lot to do with might, and the way that we tend to communicate that is often very visually. So that's you know, definitely a challenge there for people that might be vision impaired. So I mean, this might be just, you know, completely off the top of your head. It might not be something that you have any specific expertise in, but I would be really interested to know if there are mechanisms that we can access or guidance that we can seek out.
Yeah, look, universal design is a bit of a contested area at the moment, but it's supported by the Convention of the Rights for People with Disability, and it is becoming more of an important thing. My suggestion would be to talk to people with vision impairments or groups that might have some suggestions. But my other thought is that there's, and I had a brief read of your website before I came on. There's potential for discussions in light, and sorry if I'm misunderstanding this, but to work for people with autism or people with sensory issues, or you know, there's a whole realm of experience that people, you know, humans have, which is affected by their impairment, that you may be able to have something to do with. So I'm not sure if that's been work that's already been done, but I guess it's not saying how necessarily do we have to cater for people, but it's also, you know, what can we offer? You know, there's potential here and exciting stuff as well.
Great, thank you. And the second question from Laszlo is, what change would you like to see from employers?
Yep, that's a good question. I think, as with gender or cultural issues, I think there needs to be, or would be helpful if there's an understanding of the broader barriers that can occur for people with disability. And that doesn't mean you need to understand, you know, the details of what people go through, but if you understand the social model, if you get a sense that disability is externally created, then you might see that, well, actually on top of that, you know, a lack of role models, most disability, and I'm using big inverted commas here, most visions of disability are negative, of, you know, low expectation of struggling or of sickness or whatever. So if you understand that, and again, using the gender point of view, there's so few role models for people with disability that we need to proactively support people that we find or encourage them to apply. Then we've also got layers of, you know, public transport, how much of that is accessible, or, you know, housing, or you know, social connection. There's all these issues. So I think we've just got a bit of an appreciation of the landscape of, you know, people with disabilities face an enormous number of external barriers. And if we can help to encourage them and support them more, that's probably really useful. If we get people in science with disabilities, let's celebrate them, because, you know, how many role models are there? And people with disabilities have got unique experiences. We've got, you know, really important things to offer. You know, look, if 20% of the population has a disability, which is roughly what it is, you know, there's an untapped resource there as well.
Great. Thanks, Campbell. Well, those are all the questions that we have in the chat at the moment. So I think that might be a good point for us to start wrapping things up. And I just want to say thanks again so much for taking the time to speak to us and for bringing your insights to the centre. It's been fascinating. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate having the chance to be able to chat.
Great. Thanks very much.